Monday, September 28th, 1942. Dear Kitty, I had to stop yesterday long before I'd finished. I must tell you about another quarrel, but before I start on that, something else. Why do grown-ups quarrel so easily, so much, and often the most idiotic things? Up till now, I thought that only children squabbled and that those were worn off as you grew up. Of course, there is something, a real reason for a quarrel, but this is just plain bickering. I suppose I should get used to it, but I can't, nor do I think I shall, as long as I am in the subject of nearly every discussion. They use the word discussion instead of quarrel. Nothing, I repeat, nothing about me is right. My general appearance, my character, my manners are discussed from A to Z. I'm expected by order to simply swallow all the harsh words and shouts and silence, and I am not used to this. In fact, I can't. I'm not going to take all these insults lying down. I'll show them that Anne Frank wasn't born yesterday. Then they'll be surprised, and perhaps they'll keep their mouths shut when I let them see that I am going to start educating them. Shall I take up this attitude? Plain barbarism? I'm simply amazed again and again over their awful manners and especially stupidity, Mrs. Van Don's. But as soon as I get used to this, and it won't be long, then I'll give them some of their own back, and by no half measures. Then they'll change their tune. Am I really so bad mannered, conceited, headstrong, pushing, stupid, lazy, etc., as they all say? Oh, of course not. I have my faults just like everyone else, I know that, but they thoroughly exaggerate everything. Kitty, if only you knew how I sometimes boil under so many jibes and jeers, and I don't know how long I shall be able to stifle my rage. I shall just blow up one day. Still, no more of this. I bored you long enough with all these quarrels, but I simply must tell you one of highly interesting discussions at table. Somehow or other, we got onto the subject of Pim's, Daddy's nickname, extreme modesty. Even the most stupid people have to admit this about Daddy. Suddenly, Mrs. Van Don says, I too have an unassuming nature, more so than my husband. Did you ever? The sentence in itself shows quite clearly how thoroughly forward and pushing she is. Mr. Van Don thought he ought to give an explanation regarding the reference to himself. I don't want to be modest. To my experience, it does not pay. Then to me, take my advice, and don't be too unassuming. It doesn't get you anywhere. I agree with Mr. Van Don. Don't be too unassuming. Don't be too modest. I've been too modest and too humble in my life. I guess it's. I guess the best way to put it is be humble to the haughty and be haughty to the humble. That's the way I do it. Mommy agreed with this too, but Mr. Van Daan had, as always, her ideas on the subject. Her next remark was addressed to Mommy and Daddy. You have a strange outlook on life. Fancy saying such a thing to Anne. It was very different when I was young, and I feel sure that it still is, except in your modern home. This was a direct hit at the way Mommy brings up her daughters. Mrs. Van Dam was scarlet by the time, Mommy calm and cool as a cucumber. People who blush get so hard and excited, it's quite a handicap in such a situation. I blush. Mummy, still entirely unruffled but anxious to close the conversation as soon as possible, thought for a second, and then said, I find too, Mrs. Van Daan, that one gets on better in life if one is not over modest. My husband now and Margot and Peter are exceptionally modest, whereas your husband and you and I, though not exactly the opposite, don't allow ourselves to be completely pushed to one side. Mrs. Van Daan. But, Mrs. Frank, I don't understand you. I'm so very modest and retiring. How can you think of calling me anything else? Mummy. I did not say you were exactly forward, but no one could say you had a retiring disposition. Mrs. Van Dam. Let us get this matter cleared up once and for all. I'd like to know in what way I am pushing. I know one thing. If I didn't look after myself, I'd soon be starving. This absurd remark in self-defiance just made Mummy rock with laughter. That irritated Mrs. Van Daan, who added a string of German-Dutch, Dutch-German expressions until she became completely tongue-tied. Then she rose from her chair and was about to leave the room. Suddenly, her eye fell on mine. You should have seen her. Unfortunately, at the very moment that she turned around, I was shaking my head sorrowfully, not on purpose, but quite involuntarily, for I had been following the whole conversation so closely. Mrs. Van Daan turned round and began to reel off like a harsh German, common and ill-mannered, just like a coarse, red-faced fishwife. It was a marvelous sight, if I could draw. I'd have liked to catch her like this. It was a scream, such a stupid, foolish little person. Anyhow, I've learned one thing now. You only really get to know people when you've had a jolly good row with them. Then and only then can you judge their true characters. That was from Anne Frank's diary. I'm really surprised. I read this once when I was a kid and I didn't understand it back then. I was, a late bloomer for my brain. And but reading it now, she's so smart, so intelligent, such a great communicator. And these are the last few. This is the last part of her life living in hiding. So if you haven't already, click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and thanks for watching.